The courtroom buzzed with polite amusement, whispers hidden behind polished mahogany desks, the judge's chuckle echoing against marble walls. "You're his lawyer?" The judge laughed, leaning back in his chair. "And how old are you again, little girl?" Amari Jones, barely 12, didn't flinch. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned every person in the room. The lawyers, the stenographer, the jury, as if measuring their weakness and strength. 12, she said calmly, voice steady, "but years don't measure the law. Knowledge does." A ripple of laughter spread. Some smirked. Others shook their heads. Even her father, Khalid Al-Raif, sitting silently in the front row, felt his stomach tighten. He had hired her as a prodigy, but nothing could have prepared him for this stage. "Let's see what you know then," the judge said, smirk still in place, "before we waste everyone's time." Amari's small hands rested on the case file spread before her. She had spent nights memorizing precedents, dissecting legal loopholes, and understanding the complex layers of the international business case that threatened her father's company, a conglomerate owned by the legendary arabbillionaire Khalid Al-Raif. "Your Honor," she began, her tone polite but unshakable, "the clause you referenced is outdated. Let me demonstrate why this contract is invalid under the current statutes." Whispers turned to stunned silence. The courtroom leaned forward. Even the opposing counsel froze, realizing they were facing something extraordinary, not arrogance, but intellect that pierced through decades of legal complacency. She flipped through her notes like a seasoned attorney, presenting evidence with precision. Each argument dismantled assumptions, corrected misquotes, and highlighted flaws the adults had overlooked. "Objection," the opposing lawyer finally shouted. "Sustained," the judge said, before pausing, suddenly unsure. Amari didn't flinch. She adjusted her tiny blazer, straightened the lapels, and continued. "Furthermore, international trade law specifies that the transaction in question requires explicit approval from all stakeholders. The documents you reference omit signatures from 3 critical parties, therefore any claims of breach are null and void." The judge's eyebrows lifted. Murmurs spread through the gallery. The adults in the room, some seasoned lawyers with decades of experience, exchanged incredulous looks. Khalid Al-Raif, sitting quietly, felt a mix of pride and disbelief. "She's amazing," he whispered, and just like that, the power dynamic shifted. The laughter, the doubt, the arrogance in the room, all of it faded, replaced by the realization that a little girl had commanded the authority of the law with brilliance far beyond her years. This was no longer a courtroom joke. This was the rise of a prodigy who would challenge not only her father's adversaries, but the very world that underestimated her. The courtroom had grown tense. Even the judge's earlier laughter had vanished, replaced by a wary silence. Amari Jones stood confidently at the podium, her small frame barely reaching the edge, but her voice carried the weight of someone far older, far wiser. Opposing counsel, Richard Mallory, a seasoned lawyer notorious for bulldozing cases with intimidation, shuffled papers nervously. He had never encountered a lawyer, let alone a child, who could dissect contracts with such precision. "Mallory, objection, Your Honor. She's oversimplifying complex corporate statutes." Amari didn't flinch. She glanced at the judge, then back at Mallory, her tone steady. "Your Honor, I am simplifying only to reveal the truth. Oversight, missing signatures, procedural errors. These are facts, not simplifications. And facts cannot be argued away." The judge's gavel hovered uncertainly. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The room leaned in. Every adult, every lawyer, every clerk could feel it. A new kind of authority had entered. Amari began presenting evidence she had painstakingly prepared over months. She pointed to contracts, meticulously highlighting every omitted clause. She referenced international corporate statutes and precedents that even senior attorneys often overlooked. According to Article 17, Section B, the obligations cited by Mr. Mallory are null if not co-signed by all equity stakeholders. "Here," she said, lifting a chart, "you will notice that 3 signatures are missing. Therefore, any claim of breach is invalid." A murmur ran through the room. Mallory's confident smile faltered. He adjusted his tie, whispering to his associate, but Amari was relentless. "Furthermore," she continued, "the communication sent on May 12th, which the opposition claims proves liability, was never officially acknowledged. Without acknowledgement, these documents hold no legal standing. Khalid Al-Raif watched his daughter with awe. This little girl, barely 12, was defending the empire he had built, exposing flaws in a case that could have cost him millions. Khalid whispering, "I always knew she was special, but this is extraordinary." Mallory finally rose, desperation creeping into his voice. "Your Honor, we can't possibly a minor." Amari cut him off, her gaze unwavering. "Your Honor, respect for the law is not measured by age. Competence is, and I have presented the evidence, the statutes, and the precedents. The law does not discriminate, and neither will I." The judge leaned back, studying the girl in disbelief. The weight of her words pressed down on the room. The audience, once skeptical, now watched in awe. "Judge, I must admit, this is remarkable. I've never seen." Amari smiled faintly. "Remarkable or not, Your Honor, the facts remain unchanged. Justice is not bound by expectation, but by evidence." And just like that, the tide had shifted. A courtroom that had begun with laughter now bowed to intellect, courage, and truth. The next move would decide everything: Khalid Al-Raif's empire, the opposition's credibility, and the place of a little girl in a world that doubted her at every step. The courtroom was tense enough to feel it in the air. Every pair of eyes, from jury to judge, followed Amari Jones as she walked toward the evidence table. Her small hands gripped the folders tightly, but her gaze was sharp, calculating, fearless, and precise. Opposing counsel Richard Mallory attempted a condescending smile, thinking he could regain control. "Mallory, Your Honor, she's a child. This approach is highly irregular. I move to have her testimony dismissed." Amari didn't blink. She opened her folder slowly, letting every eye in the room anticipate something monumental. "Amari, Your Honor, irregularity is in the assumption that competence is measured by age. If the law is to serve justice, then evidence and logic must speak louder than prejudice." The judge's gavel hovered. He had begun to realize that this wasn't a routine case. This was masterclass in law delivered by a prodigy. Amari began her piece de resistance, a step-by-step reconstruction of the disputed contract's events. Using diagrams, emails, and a visual timeline projected onto the screen, she demonstrated exactly how the opposition had misrepresented facts and where their claims violated international business law. "Notice here," she said, pointing to a highlighted section, "that the timeline contradicts the dates provided in Mr. Mallory's argument. Furthermore, the missing signatures indicate a procedural nullification. This evidence proves that any claims of breach are legally unsound." The courtroom was stunned. Gasps from spectators, murmurs among lawyers, and even a few whispered praises from the jury. Mallory's face paled, beads of sweat forming at his temple. Mallory, hissing under his breath, "Impossible, she can't." Amari leaned closer to the microphone, her voice calm but compelling. "Impossible is irrelevant in the face of fact. Evidence does not lie. Statutes do not discriminate. And justice, Your Honor, does not require favoritism, it requires truth." The judge's hand wavered over the gavel. He had tried to dismiss her initially, laughed at the audacity, but now he saw the undeniable brilliance of a child who had mastered the law. "Judge, I must acknowledge that her presentation is meticulous. Mr. Mallory, you will respond to the evidence presented. But this is impressive for someone of her age." Amari allowed herself the smallest of smiles. She had earned not only the judge's attention, but the respect of every adult in that room. Khalid Al-Raif, sitting in the front row, felt a surge of pride he could hardly contain. His daughter, his little genius, was saving the empire with intellect, courage, and poise. And as the courtroom tension reached its peak, Amari prepared her final strike. The piece of evidence that would completely dismantle the opposition's case, a document no one had anticipated she had discovered. The courtroom had grown almost unbearably quiet. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Amari Jones as she approached the judge's bench, holding a single, neatly folded document. Her small frame seemed fragile, but her presence carried a weight no adult could ignore. "Amari, Your Honor, before we proceed, there is one final piece of evidence that has not been considered, a document critical to the case, overlooked by the opposition. Mallory's confident sneer faltered. The room shifted, the murmurs growing as the court realized something monumental was about to unfold. Amari carefully placed the document on the evidence table and opened it for all to see. It was a signed email chain between key stakeholders in the disputed contract, emails that clearly showed the opposition's claims were false. Every attempt to fabricate liability, every misrepresented signature was exposed in black and white. Amari, this correspondence proves that all obligations were fulfilled and the claims against my client are without legal standing. Furthermore, the omissions and misrepresentations in their filings demonstrate deliberate misconduct. The judge leaned forward, scrutinizing every line. Mallory stammered, trying to recover. Mallory, Your Honor, this can't, she couldn't have. Judge, silence. The evidence speaks for itself. The courtroom erupted into a mixture of stunned silence and whispered awe. Spectators, lawyers, and even journalists present were unable to contain their astonishment. A 12-year-old girl had just dismantled a complex corporate lawsuit with precision and authority. Khalid Al-Raif rose from his seat, eyes glistening with pride. His empire had been under threat, but his daughter, underestimated, dismissed, and mocked, had saved it with intellect far beyond her years. Khalid, whispering, she's incredible. She's everything I never knew I needed. Amari turned to the judge, unwavering. Justice is not dependent on age or appearance. It is dependent on truth, diligence, and the courage to stand for what is right. The judge's gavel struck decisively. Judge, the claims against Khalid Al-Raif's company are hereby dismissed in full. And I must acknowledge the extraordinary competence of Ms. Amari Jones in presenting the case. The courtroom erupted in applause, some stunned, others cheering. Mallory sat defeated, his reputation shredded by the very logic and evidence he had ignored. Amari's gaze met her father's. He smiled, pride swelling in his chest. She had done more than win a case. She had proven the power of knowledge, courage, and moral clarity. Even the judge, known for his stern demeanor, nodded with respect. The laughter and doubt that had greeted her entry into the courtroom had been silenced forever. The courtroom had emptied, leaving only the echoes of applause and astonished whispers. Outside, journalists crowded the steps, cameras flashing, eager to capture the story of the 12-year-old girl who had silenced a judge and dismantled a corporate lawsuit. Khalid Al-Raif followed Amari down the grand hallway, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, not out of control, but pride. Khalid, I never imagined this day that you, my little genius, would face the world and make it bend to truth. Amari smiled, a quiet confidence radiating for her. I didn't bend it, father. I revealed it. The world already had the answers. I just showed them the way. Outside, Mallory's team tried to salvage the wreckage of their credibility, but the media had already immortalized Amari's brilliance. Headlines would read, Child prodigy outsmarts corporate giants and 12-year-old lawyer shatters courtroom expectations. Later that evening, in Khalid's office, the father-daughter duo reviewed the events that had unfolded. The empire was safe, the case closed, and yet the true reward was far beyond wealth or influence. Khalid, you've shown me something I forgot in all my years of power, that true strength is not in dominance, but in knowledge, courage, and unwavering integrity. Amari's eyes sparkled. And you've shown me that even the most powerful need guidance, that influence carries responsibility. Power without conscience is meaningless. They both paused, the weight of the lesson settling between them. The courtroom had not only tested Amari's intellect, but it had forced Khalid to confront the ethics of his own empire. In a single day, a little girl had transformed not just the outcome of a lawsuit, but the moral compass of a billionaire. That night, as Paris glittered below, Khalid made a decision that would forever change the way his empire operated. He announced new policies within his company, mentorship programs for young prodigies, ethical oversight in all corporate dealings, and a foundation to support education for underprivileged children. Khalid, if one child can teach me the weight of truth, imagine what thousands could teach the world. Amari, tired but radiant, watched her father with pride. She had come into the courtroom as a child, underestimated by everyone, and left as a catalyst for change, justice, and integrity. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Khalid Al-Raif's office, illuminating the stacks of contracts, case files, and awards that had once defined his life. But today, his gaze was not on wealth or status. It was on Amari Jones, sitting at the large oak desk with her notebook open, reviewing plans for the foundation she would now help launch. The courtroom victory had been decisive, but its ripples were far greater than anyone had imagined. Investors, politicians, and media outlets had all witnessed the genius, courage, and integrity of a 12-year-old girl, and the story had ignited a movement. Khalid, you've done more than win a case, Amari. You've changed lives, starting with mine. Amari, no, father. We've changed lives. Justice isn't only about winning, it's about showing others that age, appearance, or status don't define the truth. Khalid nodded, understanding fully that her words were more than wisdom. They were a manifesto for integrity. In the following weeks, Ashes and Rafe Foundation, a collaboration between Khalid's empire and Amari's initiative, launched programs to educate gifted children in underprivileged communities, offering mentorship in law, business, and leadership. Meanwhile, the court case became legendary, referenced in law schools, business schools, and leadership seminars as an example of courage, intellect, and moral clarity overcoming arrogance and prejudice. Amari, now recognized globally, refused to let fame alter her focus. She continued her studies, her legal training, and her advocacy, becoming a symbol of hope and resilience. Khalid watched her, realizing that true power was never in wealth or influence, but in nurturing the brilliance of those who dared to rise against the odds. Khalid, softly, the world laughed at us, doubted us, even mocked us. But truth has its own rhythm, and it cannot be silenced. As the sun set over Paris, father and daughter stood on the terrace overlooking the Seine. The city sparkled like a sea of diamonds, a fitting metaphor for a justice illuminated by courage and integrity. Amari looked at Khalid and whispered, "One day, everyone will understand. The smallest voice can echo louder than the wealthiest empire. The meekest mind can outshine the proudest ego." Khalid smiled, a quiet, profound pride filling him. The laughter of the courtroom was now a distant memory, replaced by applause, respect, and legacy. Together, they had rewritten the rules of power. Intellect, morality, and courage were the new currencies of influence. The world often underestimates the young, the small, or the seemingly powerless. Yet courage, intellect, and truth can overcome arrogance, wealth, and doubt. A little girl who entered a courtroom with laughter in her face, armed only with knowledge, changed the course of an empire. A billionaire who once valued power above all learned that integrity and humility define real influence. In life, justice is not measured by wealth, but by the courage to stand for what is right. The strongest voices are often the quietest, the most underestimated, and those who wield power wisely, nurturing talent, protecting truth, and championing justice, leave a legacy that no fortune, no bet, and no arrogance could ever surpass. Because in the end, real power is the ability to lift others, uphold truth, and inspire generations to rise beyond expectation.